No. You can use this one in case you need it.
I don't think we need it, which is actually better. Do we actually need the mic for the recording?
I think it's better for like the
Recording,
online.
right. Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
well,
virtual
never mind.
audience. Yes. Perfect, wonderful.
It's a vibe as well.
I do the best.
Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the music and put Daniel's on it. Oh,
I guess you all wonder why I brought you here today.
go ahead and get started. I'll borrow your mic
Yeah.
real quick. Okay.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us at Left Bank Books to present Nate Powell and his new book, In Conversation with Steenz, a local comic artist here who also is so many things. You have so many things going on.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say tonight's event is possible because of all your support. We appreciate you shopping here at Left Bank Books. When you shop local, your money goes directly into the local economy. It keeps our bookstore open, and it also helps keep your streets paved, your libraries funded, your parks free, and all the other wonderful things that make St. Louis such a beautiful place to live. And we also want to welcome our virtual audience tonight on the internet. Hello, everyone. And my name is Elena Jove, and I'm a bookseller here, and I'll just be hosting this evening. And let's see what else we want to say. We have a lot of great events coming up this month here at Left Bank Books. One of them on Saturday is going to be with Amy Spalding to discuss her new book, At Her Service, which is a delightful sapphic rom-com. We'll be hosting that here in store, and she will be in conversation with one of our booksellers, Taylor. Let's see, so let's introduce the book. Irene Valentes of Comics Journal says about Fall Through that this book captures the feeling of ephemera. Like notes reverberating in the air, Powell illustrates the intangible. He showcases the stunning power of art to make sense of a fleeting moment, the fleeting nature of love and loss, life and death. Sounds so epic. And a little bit about the author. Nate is a National Book Award-winning cartoonist who began self-publishing as an Arkansas teenager in 1992. His work includes Save It for Later, and then civil rights icon John Lewis's Run, Book One, Come Again, and then Two Dead and its follow-up, Any Empire, and Swallow Me Whole. So quite a few titles of illustration. And Powell's work has also received 4 Eisner's Awards, 2 Ignatz Awards, and the Comic-Con International Inkpot Awards, multiple ALA and YALSA distinctions. He also has a music career. I didn't know, that's so cool. And he was introduced to the hardcore punk community in 1991, played over 500 shows across North America and Europe in various bands, including underground legends, Soupy Nun Squad, and Universe, as well as managing the DIY label Harlan Records from 1984 to 2010. Quite a stacked resume. And then I'm going to introduce Steenz here, local St. Louis-based cartoonist, editor, and professor. They are the cartoonists on the Ringo Award-nominated syndicated comic strip Heart of the City, and the co-creator of the Dwayne McDuffie Award-winning graphic novel Archival Quality, and are also featured in short story anthologies such as the Eisner and Ignatz Award-winning Elements and Deadbeats. Steenz launched and edited the popular RPG periodical Rolled and Told, and they participate in and create community-building, comics-related programming, and are a frequent panelist at Comic-Cons. Steenz currently teaches cartooning at Webster University while editing titles from independent publishers. They live with their husband, 2 cats, and watch lots of esoteric social documentaries. And also they have a new book coming out, which is available for pre-order, Side Quest, a visual history of role-playing games. So everybody give a warm welcome to the 2 artists here.
Thank you, thank you. So I'd like to start off with thanking everybody for coming. We love author talks, and thank you for coming. St. Louis is happy to have people come through and do these sorts of things with us. So.
I'm really happy to be here.
Good. I'm okay about being here.
That's all right. The only other time I've done a comics thing here is I went to, I guess, I don't know if it was the first slides, but it was in 2018.
Oh yeah, STL Specs in 2018
STL
at
Specs,
the
right.
St. Louis Public Library.
Yes. What a building.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I used to work there. It's gorge. Yeah.
I was dazzled by telling you to be in there. So happy to be back.
Well, you'll have to come back again in October for Slice Day.
Oh, I will.
So, perfect.
Yeah.
Time's done. So I'd like to start off by giving a summary of the book for the audience. This is as least spoilery as possible, of course, if you have not read it yet. But I'll give you my summary, and then you kind of tell me if it's wrong. So I said that this book is about a 4-person band on their first tour for their latest EP. It's a big deal for all 4 of them, but for different reasons. And one of them seems to be a bit more occupied with success and fame than the others. As they make their way through this tour, they deal with all the problems that come with going on tour, supernatural or otherwise. And it reminds us that sometimes the journey and the act of creation itself is as worthwhile as selling out stadiums. What do you think? Is that okay?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that covers a lot of it. I'm still in the phase of newness of the book being out in the world, where I'm fascinated because there are these different layers that seem so central to my understanding of the story, that hit on different points for different people. And so I'm just fascinated at the ways people are taking it in and interpreting it.
What's the way that you want people to take it in, or rather, what's the way that you felt you were taking it in?
A lot, I mean, this is where like all of my fiction, all like my weird magical realist fiction books, I feel like it's been a slow crawl since when I did Swallow Me Whole, like in 2008. A slow crawl by like doing a really weird, unique story that somehow people read and responded to, and then slowly actually developing that weaker writing sensibility, so that I'm like, oh right, concreteness and clarity allow weird parts of a story to be weirder, because they're anchored. And so for this book, it's like, it's interesting to me that I found that people are immediately most curious about like musical aspects and about punk as an underground subculture, when, as I was making it, the whole time, I was kind of actively trying to be like, how can I make this less specific to this very specific, very powerful subculture that shaped me into who I am? I was always trying to like lead it away, but that doesn't mean I should have, or it doesn't even mean I did lead it away from it. I'm sure it's just swimming in punkness or whatever.
Yeah, it definitely is. When I read through it, I had anticipated it being more supernatural than it actually was, just because, I mean, if you look at the cover, it's like, it doesn't really say much about what goes on in the book, but it does give you this idea that there's something more to just being in a band, And I wanted to talk about how this supernatural element of this book, it feels like you're illustrating the feeling of listening to live music. And I think that's where a lot of the supernatural elements come in play. When you were writing this and drawing this, is that something that you did intentionally? How did you want to get that supernatural element across?
I'd say starting with the first half of your setup here, I think that the depiction of like the sort of just ecstatic, transcendent state of making music or being in this musical space was something that was my like purest joy state while making the book. But I think a lot of the magical and supernatural elements that kind of guide the book along as a story, it was actually kind of a process of, with this book and the previous novel, Come Again, both have these strong kind of magical supernatural elements, but a lot of them found their footing when like there was a scene or a panel or a moment that I knew I wanted to draw. And a lot of it is like, for these two books, like finally I had the realization that like most of writing is problem solving. And so a lot of it is like, okay, I really want to draw this one panel. It's gonna be so awesome. And then needing to basically, it's not like you're needing to justify it. It's like, how does it fit in this world? And needing to reverse engineer conditions which allow the image itself to exist. And that's how a lot of that worked. Like to pick something random from the middle of the book, without spoilers, really. Yeah, so like, like the main two characters in this book, like the twin engines of this band, Diamond Mine, are Jody, the bass player, and Diana, the vocalist. Like, essentially, yeah, there's like some spellcraft woven into a song that's pressed onto a 7-inch that basically rips a hole in the fabric of space-time and causes, in my like casual Michio Kaku book reading self or whatever, causes, these other bubble universes or pocket dimensions to open up. So like, it's impossible to trace what this band's tour actually is. They, like, in my mind, they've played like hundreds of shows on this 4 or 5 week tour. But in my mind, each time they kind of like warp out of the situation they're in, that show keeps on going. And they wind up falling into this other kind of pocket dimension. And it's a process of essentially just trying to get back home. So a lot of it is like me being like way over my depth in like layperson's quantum physics or whatever, and being like, let's see if I can get away with this because it's a comic, really. But yeah, a lot of it I think is actually like trying to figure out situations. Like there's a weird moment in a venue that's next to a cornfield outside Lawrence, Kansas, based on an actual historic punk venue that started in 1977. And Diana, one of the main characters, has rooted the entire tour around this stop because one of her deals has to do with having a very specific kind of hero worship that has to do with following a highly specific thread of inspiration. And one of those people where she has this like uneven hero worship for almost arbitrary reasons is the highly problematic William Burroughs. But William Burroughs, fun fact, as like a septuagenarian and octogenarian, in fact, like he moved out to Kansas and would randomly show up at first and second wave punk shows out in this like concrete slab venue next to a cornfield. Even in the mid-90s, when half my band went to KCAI in Kansas City, the very first like news from the town is like, yeah, we were at the Jayhawk Diner at like 3:30 in the morning, and William Burroughs showed up. And so basically, like, there's this weird moment where debatably, this like astral projection of William Burroughs that's out like shooting guns in a cornfield comes in to like haunt the vocalist. And like the objective reality of the scene is not apparent. Big surprise for many of my books. It could go either way. But yeah, like I knew that I needed to tie the thread together with not only like these moments in my life where a lot of it is about like resisting the urge to mythologize very unique, undefinable moments in a creative movement. And so that was one of these things where I'm like, like 30 years ago when we caught whispers that this old famous writer who was punk adjacent still showed up, like actual Sasquatch style, just like emerged into regular life and disappeared again. Getting to loop those kind of personal connections in with these iffy parts of a beloved character's personality and the way she's like stringing the rest of the band along, convincing them that they're all in it together while really just trying to like push her own agenda. Like that's where story happens is figuring out how that allows me to draw this one really weird scene.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that figuring out part, some of it comes from when you're actually drawing the book, some of it comes from the outline, some of it comes from just, diddling around with dialogue. And And that kind of brings me to my next question about like how fast you work. So I read that you work so fast because you primarily work in black and white. And this interview was from like 10 years ago. So I wonder, do you still feel the same way? Do you still feel like you work very quickly because of the way that you do your comics?
This actually, like, I guess prior to March book 1, I guess I was a fairly quick cartoonist for my level of finish. And back then, strictly worked in black and white. Something happened, don't tell anyone, but basically due to like the practical and like scheduling constraints of doing the March trilogy and like touring full time for it while drawing it full time, and then having 1, then 2 children at the same time, like I just had to like do a real trial by fire with time management. And something happened between March book 2 and March book 3, and like March book 3, I had nothing drawn, and then got shingles in my eye, went blind for a month, thus lost a month of drawing time. It was like, oh, I've got 8.5 months to draw this 256-page book and research, fact check it, and tour for it while I'm drawing it. I did it. But along the way, I was like, my pace of drawing almost doubled because I had to draw about 10 pages a week that were like full gray washes, but I had to go from nothing, like pencil, letter, ink, wash, scan, process, go back, and like I had a system down. And when I look at the pages, they look the same to me as like the things I would have done a little bit slower earlier in the trilogy. And I'm like, well, I guess I just draw this fast now. But then I discovered you don't want to tell people that. Because then I was like, yeah, this crazy thing happened. I draw super fast now. And then publishers, I did the dumb thing, and in an interview, I was like, yeah, I draw like 10 pages a week. Publishers know this now. And they're like, so we hear you draw really fast. And it's become this thing where I'm like, especially with this book and Lies My Teacher Told Me, basically I had this thing where I was like, my goal as an artist is to slow down 20%. I was like, I want to be less productive. And it's been fun.
So how long did it take you to do this one?
To do this one, it took, this is where 80% of the work is actually before I ever sit at the table. And, it's all like sketchbook and writing and thinking and being like, I'm working right now. So that was years. But once I actually sat down, I'd say about a year of solid thumbnailing, writing, characterization. And then I guess I penciled it and finished the actual dialogue and stuff in a year. I was also doing Lies My Teacher Told Me at the same time at the pencil level. And then I lettered, inked, and colored the whole thing in 10 or 11 months. But doing it kind of full color, it doesn't take any longer. It was just I was just never comfortable with doing color until maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But what was fun about Fall Through was since finishing the March trilogy, I was like, well, I'm really comfortable doing a gray wash. How do I up the ante just one notch? So for Come Again, I was like, I love that sort of mid-century illustration duotone effect, where you add one color plus gray, and it gives the illusion of a lot more than just two hues. And that was so fun. And then you're like, where do I go from here? So I was like, this isn't full color. I color code a lot of situations, but I also, it's also expansive at times. And essentially, I didn't know what I was doing. I use acrylic ink washes with little droppers, like you're a little chemist. And you're like, oh, yes. But I still did, I don't know what I'm doing. I was just winging it. And that was the fun of it, being I actually get to sit down every day and learn and teach myself how to make a full color comic.
That's really exciting. How was the editorial process with that?
Well, I feel like a lot of my color coding from Come Again to Save It for Later, there's definitely the meaning of certain colors has a little bit of a carryover, and some things just work for me. And I'm just like, no, this is good, this is good. And so I feel like I was able to show a bit of a proof of concept.
Yeah.
And typically, like, this is where all editors are very different. You know, like, my beloved editor and friend Lee Walton at Top Shelf is like, he knows me well, but he's also just a really detail-oriented fellow. And so he'd like really get into the details of every part of my book, in a very like supportive way and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm like, all right, we're really editing this thing now, okay. And so it was kind of a shock to be like, all right, new publisher, my next weird fiction thing, and also great editor, Charlotte Greenbaum, and great person, but a more hands-off approach to like tackling a weird fiction story. And a lot of it was like, okay, I have questions about like 2 details and 2 big picture things.
Yeah.
And the rest is like, grammar,
Yeah.
punctuation.
Yeah.
And like, that's it?
That's it.
Oh, are you sure? And a lot of it was like, when I'd pencil it, I'd be like, this flashback part's in black and white. Or
Yeah,
like,
you write little notes
Yeah.
like so they know what you're doing.
it'll be cool, it'll be okay, I promise. Yeah.
That's really interesting because, I have an editor when I do my strip comics, and I also have an editor on my graphic novels as well. And with the strip comics, I have so much freedom. So much freedom. It's kind of ridiculous, actually, how much freedom I've got. And I also have that same feeling of like, you sure? You don't have any notes for me? But then when you go to side quest, that book took me 4 years to do, because publishing is publishing, and things just take a lot longer time. So it's really interesting to see how long different types of comics take. And it really is different. It depends on the person, it depends on the editor, it depends on the book,
It does.
But speaking of the book, I know that you're also a musician, and a lot of what you got for this book came from your own experiences touring and doing punk shows. How much of your own experiences were put into this book? Would you say like a whole lot of it?
I mean, this is where, with this book in particular, it's interesting that like many, if not most, of the individual scenes and moments that happened to Dynamine over the course of this tour, or even isolated within the process of like making the record, or what goes into some of the interpersonal dynamics, most of that has a direct root somewhere in my life or in the collected experiences of like my local community or scene. But this is where, like, number one, when you publish something and it becomes part of the world, especially like as a lot of those experiences are shared experiences, you also have to let go of that sense that you're actually saying something that is exclusively meaningful to you or revealing a window into your world. It's good, like I'm going back to my hometown tomorrow to talk, and it's gonna be a really weird book talk because I imagine that most of the people that are in the room will be like, oh, that's my memory too. That's my experience too. So I feel like when I was like going way back to 2013 to 2017, as the vaguest idea of this as a book was emerging, before the actual plot emerged, I was like, I would really like to do a book about, like, a very feelings-heavy book about the kind of toll taken on being in an underground band with the people you love the most in the world. But I wanted the book to entirely be eating, sleeping, and driving together with zero music. Not a note of music was going to be played. And this is where the problem solving winds up reverse engineering plot points. And I was like, okay, how's this going to work? I was like, okay, I can imagine like my main character is probably like, like giving, reflections as captions or whatever. But like when it's time to play, right before they play, all of a sudden it's like a smash cut and it's a different week or a different year and we're in an entirely different place and we're just going to move on to an entirely different focus. So eventually, instead of taking the shows away from the reader, I chose to take the band away from their own shows.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it does the same thing in terms of what I'm trying to get into. That like it's funny that it's about the power of this collective experience of young people making music together, and yet like these constant efforts to de-emphasize the actual rock and roll part of it.
Yeah, which is really interesting because I feel like a lot of people try and get music to be in comics all the time. And in my opinion, it never works.
It's hard.
It's super hard, because your idea of what the music sounds like is totally different from mine unless you put the actual notes in the page, Or there was a comic that I read, you guys remember Bee and Puppycat?
Yeah.
There was a Bee and Puppycat comic where there were QR codes for each of the music boxes that the character had to find. And so I was like, no, that works, but it also takes you out of it because it's a QR code, So it's really difficult to find the right balance for that. And I like that you just said, well, let's not do it at all.
You bring up a very good point, which is that like another immediate roadblock in terms of like, especially within underground music, is like the ways in which people, especially like to quote the Germs, what we do is secret. Like the ways in which people jealously guard things specific to underground punk, almost in a way that's like, not almost, in a way that's very annoying. I'm guilty of this too. I'm saying this because I'm very guilty of it. So trying to like deal with knowing that like this is a very jealously guarded thing for a reason. That's how it stays underground. But also like I'm putting this in 1994. I have all these references of a specific kind of subgenre of music with a descriptor that is very easily misunderstood today and has a different meaning. So I'm like, not only is it better not to mention or not give a description of what this music is the band plays, but then I realized like part of the point of this is the fact that this band, Diamond Mine, is an outlier even within their own weird scene, in their own weird town. And I'm like, oh right, like in any moment of a creative movement, it's always weirder and more diverse and more unique than anyone remembers it being. But in being able to talk about it and remember it together, we automatically begin to flatten and compress our memories and mythologize them so that we all have an agreed upon way to discuss things for any kind of creative movement. So I'm like, no one will ever know what this band sounds like. Like I know what they sound like to me, but I was like, I need to actually keep people from thinking they can get clues to be like, but I gotta know.
Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite parts out of the book actually, is that you didn't try to tell us, because I knew if people, whenever they try, it almost always fails a little bit,
Yeah, like
So-
when you read, sometimes when you read comics like that, like where like sometimes like you're enjoying yourself, but there's this moment where you feel like it's all being taken down a peg.
Yeah.
Where you're like, la 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 la.
Yeah, I'm skipping this.
Yeah.
But it also kind of reminds me of like when you're on tour and you're doing hundreds of shows like they are, sometimes you don't really remember any of the performances. You just remember the times in between,
Yes, exactly. And like really my main band I was in was with, it was a very weird, amorphous band that was around for like 14 years or something, with between 5 and 11 members, and like costumes and puppets and stuff. But it's like, we got like fairly like, we're like part Public Enemy, part Nation of Ulysses, part The Muppet Show. But we were very, like, number one, because we had costumes and puppets, it's very easy to flatten and mythologize the band as being like, oh, they're a silly band. They're a funny band, you see? And like, especially growing up in like second and third wave emo hardcore, being these young teenagers starting the kind of band we did was locally for us a new generational response to the elders who were like high school seniors, very, very serious about things. And we were very serious about those things too, but this is like, somehow it was like by bringing booty shorts and snacks into the content of a band was locally a radical experience. And yeah, like our collective memories as a family of being on tour very, very rarely involved ever bringing up anything from a set we played.
Yeah.
Ever.
I love the way that community is portrayed in this book. They find community from letter writing, from going to each other's houses and sleeping on their floors, to carpooling together. Can you tell us a story of a time where you really felt you were a part of this punk community? And I'll tell you one as well.
Without a doubt. I'd say, to keep it St. Louis,
Yeah.
back at one of the top 5 shows I ever played was here at 5151 South Washington, or maybe just Washington.
Yeah.
It was a house called the Bordello. We played in the basement, and it was 2 of my favorite bands at the time, which included some of my elder micro heroes who then became friends. And then as a young adult, we were like, these people are my friends now. Being shaped by them as people, and then deciding over the phone, having never met some of these people in person, that we were going to go on a week-long little jaunt across Mid-America together with 2 separate bands that were interrelated to each other, but on separate tours. But the separate tours converged here in St. Louis. That sort of as we get closer to the end of the book, that sort of, I hate to use this word, but that epic sense as you're physically approaching a destination. And also there is a sense of greater destination, which I don't want to say the word destiny, but I guess that's actually grammatically what it is. A sense of things falling into place where you're like, this meeting is supposed to be happening right now. But the people who lived at the Bordello, I don't really remember them. I remember a couple of my St. Louis friends at the time who were there, but having never met these people, they're like, okay, your band has 9 people, and these other 2 bands have 5 people each. Don't worry, here is a 30-gallon drum of vegan spaghetti and other dumpster goods that are most likely vegan, just to be safe.
Yeah.
We didn't have time to ask 30 or 40 people, so here we go. Here's buckets of food. It's all free, and you're welcome to have as much as you want. And then just the general sense of you arrive as early as you can so that you can pack in as much summer camp time as possible.
Yeah.
And then immediately after the show, we refer to that tour, our band, we refer to it as Vacation Bible Tour. It's like in the summer when it's you run out of summer camp, and then your parents are like, you're going to Vacation Bible School. And there's one random week where you make God's eyes and you do stuff, but you always go back, it's summer camp, but you go back home every afternoon.
Yeah.
So this leg of the tour, we would go out for 3 days and come back because somebody had to work a shift at their job, and then you go 2 more days and come back, and then we go all the way back up to Ohio and back. So it was our Vacation Bible School tour. So right after the show, we're like, this is the greatest moment of my life. And people were there was a dance party happening. People were playing parlor games or whatever. And it was 1 a.m, but I had to be at work the next morning. And we were like, we have to drive back to Little Rock. It's okay, we'll see you guys in 72 hours in Columbus, Ohio. Which is being a father and being 45 years old. I'm this is so stupid. And yet there was not for a moment did we consider that this was a bad idea.
Yeah.
But we're and I remember even the band was oh, talking about South Bend. This is where someone from the band was hey buddy, we were wondering, we'd like to invite you if you guys would like to come up and play South Bend and Detroit with us. Instead of going home and working that one shift at your job, just throwing me a freaking bone, just take it. And I was yeah. and yeah, just went home, worked a shift, went right back. But like that wasn't even a consideration. Making money, like $1 a gallon gas meant that you literally only needed to make $15 at a show to make it to the next show, and you not only often did, you usually made like $15 to $40 at a show. And so we're like, well, it worked.
Yeah.
We got where we're going. Okay.
I love it. So my story, I went to a house show to the Centaurettes, which you can see here from my shirt. This was the first house show that I'd gone to since like high school, you know, so I was a little out of the house show age range anyway, but you know, I went with Kat. And when we got there, they said that the guy that's supposed to take the money at the door never showed up, you know, and they had to start the set. So we were like, we'll go. And so we were like bouncers for this house show. And it was kind of sad to begin with because we're just like sitting in the living room alone while downstairs we can hear the set going. But it was really great. And we heard their song, I think it's called $10 on Pump 15. And it was so cool to hear without the visual aspects of actually seeing them play, and also have people come in and be like, where do we put the money? And we're like, put it by the door. So it just felt really cool that there was a community where they just kind of trusted people would help. You know, we had never met them before, and they were like, you watch the money. So I just love when that sort of thing happens.
I had forgotten about that element of like, besides the actually radical thing of being used to like just being in strangers' basements in a non-creepy way. But also, yes, like this happens from time to time where you're like, somebody's got to pass around the jar and
Someone's gonna do it.
you just rose to the occasion.
Yeah.
And I also love that you got like, by hearing the band like through a floor, through a wall, there's that like very muted, like no high end, like a totally different way of actually hearing the music that can only be experienced through floorboards. You're like, there it is. Like some shit's going down downstairs. I can feel it now.
Yeah, we definitely felt it. It was really, really cool. And that's why another reason why I love this book so much, because it just reminds me that, you know, the punk community is often there for each other, you know? You have to be. Okay, I want to make sure we get in my last question and point before we do Q&A. So we're almost getting there, just letting everybody know where we are time-wise. Okay, so one other thing that I really wanted to talk to you about was a fair amount of your work is relatively heavy, and that's okay.
All right.
It's okay to be a little heavy, but you know, shining light on injustice, mental health, social justice, and it really felt like this book was it was lighter, you know, even though they were stressed out about being on tour, even though some of them were really focused on, you know, making that money, it did feel more hopeful. Is that something that you wanted to come out of this book?
Well, a really important thing to know about this book is that this book was my pandemic therapy also. So not only was it like the book I had been like slowly waiting and yearning to finally like have an avenue to like express all these things, but when I started penciling it, it was, you know, like spring 2020 or summer 2020. And so thematically, like it's very important that this book is absolutely saturated with people breathing all over each other, strangers touching each other and being into it, people yelling in each other's faces, just sweat everywhere. Like I basically like started a new wave of my art style that's just like using white ink for sweat droplets everywhere on people's skin. And like, that was me being in my house, not being able to touch anyone except for my kids and my wife. As a side note, I can't just say my wife. It's like very difficult. It became incredibly important to not only like experience the joy that had been yanked from all of this, but also all of a sudden recognizing in new ways beyond being like a dad and being more post-punk or whatever, but realizing like, oh, I've taken for granted even what happens to be invited into a stranger's basement. And to be like, yeah, breathe on me, that's great. And so a lot of it was just me being like, this is just so blissful, just drawing sweat droplets being sprayed onto another person's face. I was like, and so that became, yeah, like it became like obviously a very heavy thing in its own light as I was doing it. Like I was really being nurtured by it, but like the undertone of all of that was lost as well.
It comes through, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if you like recognize that it came through, like all those feelings, but it certainly did.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so every moderation that I do, I like to get a little silly. So I will Google search my guest in honor and try and find the thing that is the most furthest from them possible. So I looked you up, Nate Powell, and I found this. There's a book called Cowboy in the Moonlight by Cheryl Marcone. Nate Powell is a rugged cowboy who meets a governess that's just fled to America to escape the authorities, and she's ready for love. So my question for you is, do you read romance novels? If so, why? And if not, why?
My mind is just blown that Nate Powell actually returns that result. It's so incredible to me. Okay, I don't read romance novels. However, side quest one, my lives. Rachel's grandmother, who's like 93, what she asks for Christmas and her birthday every year since I've known her is like a stack of, usually they are Amish themed kind of trashy romance books. They're, okay, number one, there's a whole sub genre that's Amish themed trashy romance paperbacks, but they all have like this cool like rustic, it'll be like the sheriff's forlorn daughter, or be like a strange cowboy in the flock, or whatever. They're incredible. So, and they have large print versions as well. So anyway, like over the last few years, I haven't like read a whole book, but they're everywhere in my house, and it's such a joy when the holidays roll around because I'm like, what romance novels are we going to be exposed to? It's one of the highlights of like the holiday season for me is being like, yeah. So in terms of like romance in books that I actually read, I feel like in the last like 6 or 7 years, I've fallen into this thing where when I read prose books, it's almost always memoir that is often tied into music and culture, or like nonfiction about history, civil rights, power, fascism, resistance, all the things you would expect me to read too many nonfiction books about. When I read comics, though, what I respond to most is melodrama. That's typically like supernatural or interdimensional. Like this is basically where we wind up with fall through. So like my strongest threads are everything Emily Carroll does. Everything.
So good.
Like I think Guest in the House was the best graphic novel of the year last year. But like everything Becky Cloonan does, and just like we went to school together, but we weren't friends back then. But it was actually reading her comics for so long, maybe a decade ago, actually pushed me to embrace genre for the first time, to be like, oh, right, these are like hunks and babes doing magical stuff, but it's also steamy. It's steamy and demonic. But if you're talking about romance, to me, like the most powerful kind of like soap opera in my life is the interdimensional soap opera of X-Men, which, as any like actual X-Men nerd will tell you, is a soap opera first. And so like X-Men is like the thing that gave me a social conscience. It's the thing that made me decide to draw comics and stuff. And then I fell out of it for like 25 years.
That's X-Men for you.
It is. And I was like, I don't know how to get back in. Like, I'm like, I'm too far gone. But I had like a local friend, and I was like, help me, please. Thankfully, he was like, just get a House of X Powers of X.
That's right, Xbox,
Yeah.
that's so good.
And I was like, really? That's it? He's like, you'll be fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
And it was fine. And I've probably read 15,000 pages of X-Men in the last year and a half. And I'm just like, I will never miss an issue. But that is my trashy romance
I love it.
with the interdimensional edge in my heart.
Well, I want to thank you, before we get to any Q&A, thank you for all of the incredible things you have to say about Fall Through and your experiences. It's really, really great. Can we get a quick clap, maybe even a snap for your name? Yeah. Okay, so Q&A from the audience. Any questions at all for our good friend Nate Powell?
Now's your chance.
It doesn't have to be comics related either.
I did have a question, but I think you kind of answered it. I was going to ask, is there a Spotify playlist?
There actually is. See,
Because you said we can't hear it.
right. Okay, so I was basically pushed to do this, but I was into it. Yeah, like I simultaneously, in that dynamic tension way that only underground punk snobbery can provide, I was like vehemently opposed to like peeling back the window. I was like, if people know that this is a line from the DC band Hoover in here, then maybe they'll follow that breadcrumb trail, Slender reference, or whatever. But yeah, I was like not gonna do anything. And then like publicist, I believe the publicist at Abrams, delightful person, was like, got an idea. Because I was like, we want to send this out to music magazines to review as a music book, even though it's fiction. Just send it, see what happens. And then she was like, better yet, let's see if we can get a music website to sponsor like a playlist for the book. It didn't happen, but then I was once the seed was planted, I was like, oh yeah. So at the last minute, I was like, I've never done this before, but I was like, I have like one entry on my YouTube account where I was like, I guess I just made a playlist. I found all the songs except 2. So here it is. And I was like, I'm not gonna hide it from people, but I'm also not gonna tell people about it, but it's on my link tree.
I love that it's such like a Generation X way of making a Spotify playlist as well as put it on YouTube.
Yeah.
What was funny is by the nature of like underground 90s DIY hardcore, like it's amazing.
There's a lot on there.
But it's also amazing that I was like, once I started going, I was like, oh, probably 30% of the stuff is inaccessible, if not more, on Spotify. But I was like, here we go. Yeah, there are a lot of nerds just ripping their records on YouTube. And I was like, here you go, you middle-aged people, just let it happen.
Any other questions from anyone?
What was your main instrument when you were in the band?
Oh, in general, I would just yell and roll around. However, I do play bass, and so in my last real band and project bands, I would play bass and yell. I play bass okay, and I play other instruments poorly. Like I actually have I got a pandemic tiny child drum set for my 4-year-old, which only I play. It's just like I just go for it. And it's like under the stairs in a 3-foot high room, and I'm just like, I close the door, and just like, but yeah, bass is really the only thing where I'm like, I can do that. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the documentary King of Kong, Fistful of Quarters?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the main guy, Steve Levy, does the same thing. He plays his kid's drum set. Yeah.
You got a kick, you got a snare, you got a little thing that dings.
I know.
What's funny with those baby drum sets is I discovered it's like they come with drumsticks, and then I had a couple of leftover drumsticks from my swinging days. And I was like trying to play with actual drumsticks, and I was like, oh. And then I discovered I would just take markers
Yeah.
from the arts and crafts area, and I was like, my children, just so you know, just get markers and it's better, I promise. And they're like, Dad, we don't even care. Like, seriously, don't you want to drum with markers? And I was like, oh, I guess it's my drum set now.
Great question. Okay, I mean, I think that's pretty much it unless we have any more questions. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you again for coming and
Thank you,
doing
Steenz.
this. Thank you all for coming and listening to us talk. And let's start the signing. Come on up. Let's look.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Start the line up here, and if we do have additional copies for sale up at the front desk as well as the backlist.
Remember to keep it single file?
Share, shoving. Here's a text message after I resent it.
I know.